Aloha and welcome to Island Connections. I am Ibrahim Aoude, narrating Dissent. At the studio we have Anne Wright. We're fortunate to have Anne Wright. Welcome, Anne.
Thank you.
Anne is a retired U.S. Army colonel and a former diplomat, U.S. diplomat. And she will tell us more about her professional career and also what she did and why she resigned from the diplomatic service and so forth. And we would like to talk also about her book, co-authored with Susan Dixon. It's called Dissent. And that, in fact, inspired the title for this show, Narrating Dissent. But we will be talking about also her trip to the borders of Gaza, the Egyptian borders with Gaza, and what happened over there. So welcome, Anne. Thank you very much for coming.
Thank you.
And please introduce yourself further so you can put us in the context of what we're going to be doing right now.
Surely. As you mentioned, I am a retired U.S. Army Reserve Colonel. I spent 13 years on active duty with the Army and 16 in the reserves. I served in places such as Grenada, Panama, Somalia with the military, as well as Germany, the Netherlands, and then places in the United States such as Fort Bragg, North Carolina, Fort McClellan, Presidio of San Francisco. I also was a U.S. diplomat following my military career, and in my diplomatic career I served in Nicaragua, Grenada, Somalia, Uzbekistan, Kyrgyzstan, Sierra Leone, Micronesia. I helped reopen the U.S. Embassy in Kabul, Afghanistan in December of 2001 and stayed in Afghanistan for 5 months. And then I was at my last, what turned out to be my last assignment, which was with the U.S. Embassy in Mongolia, when in March of 2003 I decided I could not stay in the U.S. government with the Bush administration's decision to invade and occupy an oil-rich Arab Muslim country, Iraq, that had not done anything to the United States and had nothing to do with the events of 9/11. So I resigned in March of 2003 and was the third federal employee to resign. It just happened all three of us were diplomats. We didn't know each other. We were in different parts of the world when we resigned, but it was all on points of principle and points of conscience that we felt that the decision by the administration to invade and occupy Iraq was going to be a monumentally dangerous decision for the security of the United States. And each one of us felt that it was more appropriate that we resign and then be able to speak our minds as private citizens. So that's what I did. And since then, I've been very active in speaking my mind. And as you mentioned, this book, Dissent, Voices of Conscience, is about men and women of our government and about the governments of other countries who challenged their own government's decision to invade and occupy Iraq, and also men and women of our military who decided that they, even though they had volunteered to be in the military, that they could not agree to the orders that were going to be sending them to Iraq and in some cases Afghanistan, because they felt that there was no legal basis for us to be in either country.
Mm-hmm. Most commendable, actually, and a lot of those voices of conscience, their stories are in the book. Yeah. So could you give us like an example of, say, one of the other diplomats whose story is here?
Surely.
Yeah.
Well, the other two, one was Brady Kiesling, who was the political counselor of the U.S. Embassy in Athens, Greece. He had been in the diplomatic corps 18 years at the time, and he, after searching his soul a long time of whether or not he could represent the policies of the Bush administration, whether he could continue to give the government of Greece the rationale that the Bush administration was giving him, and I in the same manner. I was in Mongolia, and when it reaches the point that you cannot, you don't agree and you don't believe in what your government's telling you, you have to tell another government on behalf of your own government, which is actually your job as a diplomat. You're you're faced with two choices. Either you hold your nose to these policies and go ahead and do it, or you resign. And I must say, over my 16-year career in the diplomatic corps, there were some times that I held my nose to some of the policies that we were being told to talk about and encourage other countries to go along with us. I did not resign on those, though, and it was the decision to invade and occupy Iraq and the dangers that I saw coming to U.S. national security from that policy is the one that I resigned on, and Brady Kiesling the same way.
Yeah, that's a good one. Could you give us another example of a military individual who has whose story is in this Voices of Conscience Dissent?
Well, we have about 25 men and women who are profiled in the book from the military who looked at what was happening and said, I don't believe there's a legal basis for us to go into Iraq and in some cases Afghanistan. Primarily, though, most of them were concerned about Iraq. And one of them is, of course, a man right here from Hawaii, First Lieutenant Aaron Watada, who although he said he would volunteer to go to Afghanistan, he said that he believed that the war in Iraq was not founded on legal principles, and it was a violation of international law, and he refused the orders to deploy to Iraq. He was court-martialed once. The court-martial ended in a mistrial, and then the military waited for about 2.5 years while Aaron Watada was still on active duty. He was still going to work every single day for 2.5 years as the Army mulled over what they were going to do next. And at one stage, it appeared that they would try to have a second court-martial, but the federal court stepped in to say that to remind them that double jeopardy would apply if indeed they tried to court-martial him on the same charges. And as time went on, I guess the military decided it was probably better not to court-martial him again and just keep him kind of in limbo for the next 2.5 years, which they did. He was finally released from active duty in the latter part of 2009. And while he did not go to jail for his decision to refuse the orders to Iraq, the other men and women did go to jail, anywhere from 3 months to 15 months. We've now had 4 people who have been sentenced to 15 months in jail. We also cover in the book another group of military persons who are in Canada, who, like many tens of thousands of Americans during the Vietnam War, went to Canada to wait out the war. During the Vietnam War, the Canadian government would give U.S. war resistors political asylum. However, the Harper government, a conservative government in Canada, has refused the political asylum opportunity and has required that these men and women apply for refugee status, which they have, but they've never been accorded that status. Three men have been returned to the United States, deported from Canada and placed back into the hands of the U.S. military, where they've now been court-martialed and imprisoned for their decision not to obey orders. And of course, it's a very difficult decision for those men and women to make. They are volunteers in the military. I think all of them have said, they joined because they believe that they had an obligation of national service. And then their decision to say that I can't go along with something the President of the United States is ordering our military to do. I mean, it's a monumental decision because they know they're going to be ostracized in their unit and perhaps in their own family, that they will undoubtedly be court-martialed and that they will spend time in jail and they will have a dishonorable discharge on their records. And it will make it difficult sometimes for them to get into universities. It'll be difficult for them to get jobs. but they have chosen to take this big step because their conscience is guiding them, and they know that if they don't do what their conscience tells them to do, that they'll be suffering the rest of their life because they knew that they should have followed their conscience, but they didn't.
Yeah. It's like a case of ours is not to ask why, ours is to do or die. That kind of thing, you know.
Well, but they do ask though, and they say, well, I don't know that I'm necessarily going to die for a policy that I don't think is right. And even though the President and the Congress have said we'll go do this, I mean, it takes a very strong person to challenge our government, and certainly the generals in our military and the admirals don't challenge. And one could say, well, they're not supposed to. I mean, if the military challenged the civilian leadership of our country, it would be a coup. However, behind the scenes, one would hope that the senior leadership of our military would really be much more forthcoming about their concerns of military operations if they feel that the operations indeed are not going to enhance our national security, but in fact are going to degrade it. We do cover some other people in the book, some retired military officers, retired generals, who actually were speaking up before the war started and immediately after it started about the danger of it, including a retired three-star general who was an old family friend of the Bush family, Lieutenant General Brent Scowcroft.
Yeah, Air Force.
Air Force, that's right, who in a Wall Street Journal article about 3 months before the war started really laid out what he felt was going to happen. And the Bush administration did not like to see that in print. And even though Brent Scowcroft was a family friend, he was apparently never invited to the White House. Other generals that were speaking out behind the scenes were not so, well, there were some retired ones that were talking about the danger of the war in Iraq, but other ones that were on active duty were talking about some of the policy decisions that were being made on the implementation of the war in Afghanistan and in Iraq, and particularly on the issue of the Geneva Conventions, and not according the Taliban and Al-Qaeda at least Article 3 provisions of the Geneva Conventions, and saying that if we, the United States of America, that prides itself on the rule of law, on implementing international law, abiding by it and implementing it, that indeed if we threw away the Geneva Conventions, then it would lessen our image in the world, and it would put our own servicemen and women at risk when we could not at least have the moral high ground to say that we were abiding by the Geneva Conventions, and if by some chance others who might capture one of our servicemen and women and tortured them, and we would have really no high ground to say we don't do that, and we appeal to the international community to support the United States in castigating someone that's doing the torturing. And now when we find out, yes, indeed, the United States does torture. In fact, it was a policy of the Bush administration through John Yoo and Alberto Gonzales. It really did jeopardize us. But the judge advocate generals, the two-star judge advocate generals, the chief military lawyers of each of the military services, behind the scenes were writing memoranda to the Bush administration saying, don't throw out the Geneva Conventions. Please don't throw that out. So the book does cover a lot of very interesting situations that we faced, and it also covers men and women of other governments, the British government, the Danish government, the Australian government, who many of whom resigned. And in fact, right now in England, there's a very interesting thing going on right now. There's an inquiry by the British government on how they got into the Iraq War. And several of the people that we have profiled in the book have been testifying, and their testimony goes right along with the narrative that we have had in this book, that indeed there was no legal basis for the British to go to invade and occupy Iraq, and they kept telling the Blair administration that, and Tony Blair chose to ignore it.
Yeah, Tony Blair says like he would have done it again. I mean, so he's unrepentant, and he doesn't see the problems with international law and so forth that he had violated and so on.
Well, it's one of the sad states that we find ourselves in. That in the last 9 years, there's been so many instances where members of our U.S. administrations and the British administrations have chosen to lie to the American public and the British public, and then have covered up criminal acts. And then when we find out about these criminal acts, we can't get the next administration to hold those people accountable, which to me is a real breakdown in our whole system. When we have, I mean, just because you get elected to public office doesn't mean that you are, if you commit crimes, that you can't be held accountable for them. And to have other administrations that are not willing to bring forward this evidence so that we can have trial and evidence presented, and a jury of the peers make determinations on whether or not there were criminal acts committed by senior members of our government.
Yeah, well, this is disappointing as regards to the Obama administration in particular, because they didn't take the high ground, in fact. And but it's not surprising, because he has reneged on a lot of other policies, including the Guantanamo issue and so forth. Yeah.
Well, that's right. And the Guantanamo issue, and today the pressure's coming now again from the Republicans saying they don't want any trials to be held in New York City. They don't want to have any trials be held anywhere on the mainland of the United States, which of course is nothing more than what the Bush administration was arguing for the 8 years they were in power. And to have the Obama administration, which from the beginning, and in fact during his campaign days, he campaigned on the fact that he would close Guantanamo. He was elected, and the people want that place closed. It is a horrible, I mean, I travel around a lot in the world, as I'm sure you do, and we know what the horrible image is of the United States with just that one word, Guantanamo.
Yes. Yeah.
It's horrific. And until that thing's closed, and until the 175 people that are still in Guantanamo are either accorded an appropriate trial or are released, then the image of the United States will continue to go down the tubes, and trying to recover from that is going to take decades.
Yeah, and then, just something that I heard just last night, even in terms of a popular culture like movies, etc., like Avatar, regardless of what one might think about Avatar, the fact of the matter, like in Jordan, and I heard that just last night, I was on Skype with someone over there, said they went to see it, and then at the end of the movie, the entire movie started clapping, which tells you, for anyone who has seen Avatar, tells you what it means, to have people come and occupy a particular place. You don't think that the people of that place are going to be in love with you, for instance, and so forth. And just like that movie, Avatar, really left an indelible mark on those publics in the Middle East, in the Arab world, and in other places as well in that region. So I just want to say that, it is there, that kind of deep feeling,
It certainly is.
Yeah. And thanks to the record of U.S. foreign policy over the years, not only with Bush, but even preceding Bush, even before the Vietnam War and so on, that led to this kind of situation, which is really tragic for the peoples who are on the receiving end of that, but also for the American people, because then they'll have to put up with the consequences of the foreign policy of our own nation.
Yes.
Yeah. So I just wanted to say that. But also you have been very, very active in terms of the Palestinian issue. And you have just come back from a recent trip to Egypt, where you tried to go into Gaza to deliver humanitarian aid, but also to break the siege of Gaza that the United States government supports the Israeli government in laying that siege. So could you tell us something about your particular involvement and experiences?
Yes. Well, in my letter of resignation to the Bush administration, not only did I put in that letter my concern about the decision to invade and occupy Iraq, but I also mentioned some other things. And one of the four main points I had in my letter of resignation was the continuation of the unbalanced policies that the Bush administration had, as has had all of the U.S. presidential administrations on the issue of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. That the United States supports blindly anything that Israel does and does not hold accountable Israel for acts against the Palestinians and others that are blatant attacks in violation of international law. So I as a U.S. diplomat, had always, in every country that I was in, that was one of the main questions that was always asked to U.S. diplomats. How in the world can the U.S. continue to support Israel and not call their hand on some of the things that they're doing? And not at all to justify suicide bombings, rockets that are being fired from Gaza into Israel, but to acknowledge that when you oppress people so much, and in the way the Israelis have done the Palestinians, both in the West Bank and in Gaza, that there are times that people lash out again. Well, anyway, the lashing out of people of Gaza sending rockets into Israel is the rationale that the Israelis used in December of 2008, and starting in December 27th, to unleash a 22-day attack on the people of Gaza, the 1.5 million people that live in the small little place called the Gaza Strip, 25 miles wide or long and 5 miles wide. With 1.5 million people in it, it's one of the most densely populated places in the whole world. And Israel surrounds Gaza on three sides, two by land and one by sea, and Egypt surrounds the southern border. There's no escape. It is what the Israelis did, the most powerful military in the Middle East and fifth most powerful in the world. Essentially had no opposition at all as they bombed, strafed, put white phosphorus, burning white phosphorus, putting the dense inert metal explosive bombs, mortars, tank shells, naval fire into Gaza for 22 days, resulting in 1,440 people dead, 5,000 wounded, 50,000 left homeless, 200 industries gone, agricultural areas purposely torn up by tanks that came in as the Israeli military occupied it. Well, when I saw that on TV in December and January of 2009, I was stunned by the disproportionate use of force that the Israeli military was doing. You know, as a military person, you know, we the United States have such overwhelming military superiority over virtually everyone. And we saw it when the U.S. attacked Iraq, when we had that shock and awe, that horrible, in my opinion, violations of international law, shock and awe, bombing Baghdad at certain areas to the ground. Disproportionate use of force, in my opinion, there. And then to see the Israelis again, as they had done against Lebanon in 2006, now in 2009 we had the destruction of so much of Gaza. So I went to Gaza, I and two other people, to include Medea Benjamin of Code Pink Women for Peace and Tig Berry of Code Pink. We went to Gaza a year ago. Actually, I was looking at my diary yesterday, and yesterday was 1 year when we entered Gaza, and we stayed there for only 48 hours. The Egyptians said, well, and it was a miracle we got in. We still can't figure out why we got in, and the hundreds of other people that were waiting to try to get in didn't. But the Egyptians said, you only have 48 hours and you better get out because we don't know when we're going to reopen the border. So we moved very quickly through Gaza. We saw the devastated, horribly destroyed areas. We talked to as many people as we could, and we came back committed to bring groups to Gaza to see for their own eyes. And 7 delegations later, and about nearly 450 people later that we got into Gaza. In the summer, after this last delegation, we decided we would try to get a large number of people and bring them to Gaza in what we were going to call the Gaza Freedom March, to be there on the anniversary of the Israeli attack on December 27th, and then have a march with the people of Gaza on December 31st. Well, lo and behold, the world really turned out for this. I thought if we have a couple of hundred people, that would really be good. Well, we had 1,362 people that showed up. And 5 days before we were to go into Gaza, the Egyptian government said they were not going to let us go into Gaza. So we ended up having all these people already in Egypt, and then what do you do? Well, when you have, anytime two activists gather together, it can be trouble. And when you have 1,300 of them there from 44 countries, I was thinking every single day that the Egyptian government either was going to let us go into Gaza or they were going to arrest and deport us, because there were things that were just happening all over the place. Incredible, incredible things. But before we get into that, and I have some pictures about that.
We're gonna show some pictures from Arabic newspapers, Egyptian newspapers, in fact.
Yes.
And one of them is in English. But just as we go, could you talk about those particular photos?
Surely, yes.
It's interesting, and then I'll try to translate the Arabic if it is appropriate for us to do so.
Yes.
Yeah. Say.
This is the 85-year-old Holocaust survivor on the left, Hetty Epstein, who is on a hunger strike, and all the people behind her and around her have joined her in a hunger strike to see if that would get the Egyptian government to let us into Gaza.
Right. The Arabic title is say, in all languages, no to the siege, no to the wall. And you might want to say something about the wall. Which wall are we talking about?
Surely. There's a new wall that's being built. Well, there is a wall above the ground that separates Gaza from Egypt. But now the Egyptian government, with the assistance of the United States government, is constructing an underground wall that will go down about 70 feet and will, it's supposed to be an impenetrable wall, as they call it, that no one is able to get through it. And that's to stop the tunnels that are several hundred tunnels that are dug under the Egyptian border, which are the lifelines to keep food and merchandise going into the population, because the siege that the Israelis have put around Gaza has limited by 90% food and medicines and materials to go into Gaza.
Yeah.
So this underground wall is really a horrible example of really cutting off the lifelines to a people.
Yeah.
And so we were, at the same time we were there is when they started construction on this wall to cut off those tunnels that sometimes go down 70 feet and then anywhere from 500 to 900 feet under the Egyptian border.
Is this idea of a wall an American idea executed by the Egyptians with U.S. money? Or what is it?
Well, certainly it's the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers that have helped with the design of it. And when you look at other walls around the world, the Israeli walls that are now in the West Bank, that are called the apartheid walls, that separate Palestinians from their schools, Palestinians from their agricultural lands. When you look at what the United States has built on our southern border, we have a history of cooperating and building these types of walls. However, these types of walls ultimately don't work. The forces of nature, and if you think about the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers and their work on the levees down in
Yes,
New Orleans.
yes.
The forces of Hurricane Katrina did in those levees, and the forces of the people of Gaza will do in any wall that they put up.
Yeah.
But in the shorter term, it certainly is, it's horrific for the people of Gaza who have been put in this open air prison, this cage for years now. And if you don't think that's enough to make people lash out at you, I mean, what else do you need?
Yes, and there are other pictures from the Egyptian press. We will be watching momentarily.
Okay. Yes, this is in front of the one on the right is pictures of people laying down in front of the French embassy. We had 300 French who decided they would just go to their embassy to protest to see if they couldn't get their government to help put pressure on the Egyptian government. And they camped out there for 5 days in front of their embassy. Here's another picture of some of them. And then camping out. And then as we go further on across, we had 5 Jewish rabbis that were with us. There were, I would say probably, of the U.S. delegation, which numbered about 330, I would say that at least 60 to 70 people were of the Jewish faith, at least. There are so many Jewish people that are horrified about what the Israeli government is doing. And then the last picture is a collage of photographs, and it says "From Italy to Gaza." And we had many delegations. We had one from New York that had a huge banner that was taken, a picture taken in Times Square 2 nights before they left to come to Gaza. From New York to Gaza with all of Times Square lights behind it.
Yeah. So there's another one, a photo. It will come on momentarily. And but yeah, there it is.
Oh yes,
Yeah.
and this is on one of the marches that we had, and you can see in the upper part of it riot police surrounding us. We saw so much of those riot police. We almost knew them by name by the end of the many days that we were there. Every single day we did something somewhere in Cairo, and it's remarkable because Egypt is not a democracy. Egypt is a totalitarian state with President Mubarak, virtually president for life Mubarak, who doesn't countenance any freedom of assembly sort of things for the people of Egypt.
Yeah.
In fact, there's a law that says that if you cannot have more than 6 people meeting together. So when we had 1,360 people meeting,
divided by 6.
yeah, that would be a lot of little groups. But the Egyptian government, not only did they not allow us to go to Egypt or to go to Gaza, they canceled all of our permits for meeting places. And it really put us in I mean, how do you get all these people together? How do you communicate with them unless you can gather them together? So we started using public spaces. We used Tahrir Square, which is right in the middle of
Tahrir,
Cairo.
Yeah, and there's another photo that's very nice. It has to do with ancient Egypt, but also modern politics.
Well, that's right. Here's the picture up on the left part of it of an Egyptian flag that's high up on
Palestinian flag.
Pardon me, Palestinian flag, high up on the walls of the one of the pyramids, and that flag is about 40 feet long and 20 or maybe 15 feet high. It was huge, and yet it looks so small on the pyramid.
Yeah.
And then down in the right-hand corner, you see one of the police officers' faces there, and then a huge group of people following behind in one of the marches that we had. One of them was to the Israeli embassy. We had probably 500 or 600 people that were out in front of the Israeli embassy one day, and one of the newspapers says that's the first time in living memory that anyone has ever protested out in front of the Israeli embassy.
Yeah, and the caption there said like the high dam and the low wall, meaning like the wall under the ground. But also in Arabic, it means like the high dam is like somebody taking the high ground, whereas the low wall done by low people who are low lives, that kind of, it has that kind of connotation to it.
Yes.
So, but you had a lot of support, you said, from the Egyptian people?
Yes, there were a lot of Egyptian people that would come out to the demonstrations, protests, vigils that we would have. We had candlelight vigils at night. We tried to float candles down the Nile and to commemorate the deaths of the 1,440 Palestinians that had been killed during the Israeli attack on Gaza. The police wouldn't let us float those. In fact, they wouldn't let us get on the boats that we had already hired.
So I have here a video about, it's interesting, this is after the destruction of Gaza in December 2008, January 2009. It's about 9 minutes, but I think it's we would do well to watch it, and then you might want to comment on that later on as well.
Surely.
So,
refugees that make up 80% of Gaza's population has felt the effects of the siege in all aspects of their work.
Well, the siege is near total in terms of its restriction on supplies allowed into Gaza. In essence, what is allowed to come in are the basic, what they call humanitarian supplies. Other than that, nothing else gets in. There are no supplies allowed in for recovery or reconstruction. We haven't been allowed to bring in any cement or any other supplies for recovery since June 2007. We have the money, it's in our bank account, but we can't actually get the supplies in to get on with that work. The result, of course, is that classes continue to be overcrowded, clinics continue to be overcrowded, and that has a detrimental impact on, again, the quality of human development here.
The range of destruction is breathtaking. Schools, health clinics, houses, and the basic infrastructure of both public services and government have been destroyed. The building housing the Palestinian parliament has been reduced to rubble, and legislators are forced to meet in a tent outside.
All of the infrastructure was destroyed by the Israeli occupation attacking on Gaza. And all of the factories inside Gaza are closed after this suffocating siege and embargo.
There is an intense desire here to rebuild, and there is no shortage of skilled labor. Billions of dollars of aid from countries around the world, including the U.S., have been pledged. But scarcely a single house has been repaired, and people are still living in tents or with family members or in shelters.
كانت هذه الدار يعني كلها مبنية وكلها يعني رسمي كويس ومرتب، الشارع نظيف وكله نظيف، وكان يعني نطلع ونسهر ونشتغل، والجيران يعني حبايب مع بعض يطلعوا وينزلوا ودكاكين وكله كويسة كانت. أنا كنت أشتغل خياط، ففيش خياطة اشتغلت فيها، أنا كان لي أغراض في داري هنا كلها راحت مع الدار. هذه يعني شريتها جديد لسه.
The siege has devastated Gaza's healthcare infrastructure. During the bombing, at least 16 medical personnel on duty were killed by Israeli weapons, and 22 were injured. Medical facilities across the Strip were targeted, including rehabilitation centers like this one.
The health situation in Gaza Strip is a catastrophic situation. You can imagine we are working in the Ministry of Health since 3 years under siege, political siege, financial siege. We are not allowed to get any financial support. We are not even allowed to have an account in the bank. Our patients are not allowed to leave Gaza Strip to be treated abroad. We are talking now about 388 patients who died because they were not allowed to leave Gaza Strip. We are talking about absence of medicine. Now we are talking about 70 items of medicine where the stock is zero. Fuel needs of Gaza Strip were decreased to less than 15% of our daily needs, and you can imagine the effect on the health situation.
More than 320 factories and 800 private businesses, the building blocks of Gaza's economic independence, were wiped out.
The industries here, not just the actual industrial sector, but also the agriculture and the fisheries, are very restricted. the farmers who are in the areas of the perimeter with Israel are, continuously suffering from the invasions of the Israeli military. The land is bulldozed and crops are destroyed, or trees and so on and so forth. So that's unfortunately their daily reality, and it's a dangerous place for them to operate, particularly when they're close to the perimeter fence.
صعبة صارت كل مش لعندنا احنا بس، كل الناس اللي على الحدود، كل الناس اللي على الحدود تضررت. فلفل وبطيخ، هذا كنا نزرع برضه في المسافة الأرض اللي بيمنعونا منها، كنا نزرع كميات كبيرة يعني مش على قد المساحة هذه، بس الحين في المنع 300 متر والطخ علينا في 700 متر. المنطقة الزراعية الكميات الكبيرة اللي نزرع فيها مساحات كبيرة بطخ علينا فيها. يعني قبل كم يوم راح نسقى زيتونات هذول شايفين؟ شايفين؟ بعد عن 300 متر، يجي يحط لك طلقة جنبك وطلقة من فوقيك وطلقة، يضل يعني زي ما تقول لمن خلاص لمن انت تروح من النتف هذا بالمرة. بطلنا نقدر نزرع يعني، غير نزرع حوالي الدار يعني حوالي البيوتنا يعني.
That last round of conflict, the stated target was the infrastructure of terror, when in actual fact what was struck were institutions of education, including the American school, which was destroyed.
This school has been one of the best schools in Palestine, not just in Gaza. We never thought that the school would be targeted by the Israelis. And of course the pretext the Israelis would give that the school has been the site for launching rockets, and this is absolute lie.
60% of our children, of our people here in Gaza are children below 18, which means education is one of the main problems for the society. You are talking about many schools completely destroyed during the last attack. We don't have enough paper for the final examinations. We don't have any facility for the examinations. You are talking about classrooms with 50 and 60 students with 2 shifts. In some schools we might have 3 shifts. You are talking about children who are suffering of malnutrition, anemia.
So far, the Obama administration has done very little to change its policy towards Palestine. But awareness is rising in the US and around the world, and activists have been working to break the siege and put pressure on the Israeli government through boycott and divestment. With each day, international solidarity grows, while Palestinians remain steadfast in their struggle.
الاشغال بنقدم طلبات والله ما عارفين بيقولوا تفتح المعابر يجيبوا شمات وحاجات زي هذه.
The politics is failing the people of Gaza. The siege on Gaza should be lifted instantly. It's contrary to international law. Now, if we achieve that, that will have a massive positive in every respect. Starting with, of course, the daily lives of innocent civilians, and then we can start to move forward.
Yeah, so...
Well, let me mention that film was actually taken on one of our trips. That was in March of 2009, and the man whose voice that you are hearing is Jordan Flaherty from New Orleans. And each one of our delegations has been charged with bringing back to their home communities information about Gaza, writing articles, speaking to community groups, and making films and putting up on Facebook and on collections of photographs so that they're available for people to see. It's still very hard. It's stunning to me that there still is such a misconception about what has happened in Gaza, and our own government hasn't helped us any at all when the Goldstone report, which was commissioned by the United Nations to have a UN investigative team go to Gaza and write a report about what happened. And they came back with a 580-page document which laid huge blame on the Israeli military for disproportionate use of force, but also did say that Hamas should not be firing those rockets into Israel. But the United States government then totally undercut the report, bending to the will of the Israeli government that mounted a huge PR campaign right after the report came back. To say, a campaign to the world to say this is one-sided, it's biased, you know, it's anti-Semitic. That's the phrase that's always used. Anybody that wants to criticize Israel, then you're immediately called the
anti-Semitic.
Anti-Semitic.
And if you're Jewish, you're self-hating Jew.
That's right. But what's so interesting, the head of this commission that investigated what happened in Gaza actually was a member of the Jewish faith. Judge Goldstone, Richard Goldstone, who is a jurist from South Africa, who has done investigations of military conflict in other parts of the world. He's very well known. He's known to be a balanced professional, and yet the Israeli government went after him with both barrels, even though he's on the board of directors, like of Hebrew University. Boy, that didn't matter to them. They were going after him because the report was critical of Israel.
Yeah, and he's a Zionist too. I mean, he's not like anti-Israel or anything.
Yeah. Well, in the U.S. Congress, there was a vote in the U.S. Congress, which only 30 members of our Congress had the conscience to say, we can look at this and we can tell what's going on here, and we're going to vote that the United States should support that this report be formally put before the Human Rights Commission of the UN. The rest of the House of Representatives voted no, indicating the huge lobbying power, of course, of AIPAC, the American Israeli Public Affairs Council, and other Israeli government support groups.
Yes, yeah. That AIPAC, that committee, I mean, has a lot of support. I mean, a lot of power. You know, bigger than probably any other, you know, lobbying group, except perhaps for the RNA, is it? NRA, National Rifle Association, right, yeah. So these compete with each other in terms of power and so forth. But it is fascinating that someone, a Zionist like Judge Goldstone, who said that actually it is for the sake of Israel that we should recognize and acknowledge those crimes perpetrated against you know, indigenous populations, so that Israel would gain at the end after saying that, you know, we can like punish those people who commit crimes against humanity and against international law, they break the law and so forth. So that would be better for Israel than if we just like gloss over it. And he's been right so far, because since the Gaza events, in fact, I mean, this like Turkey shoot, actually, it's not a war, and you know that it wasn't a war.
Attack.
Yeah, that you know, since those kinds of things, you know, Israel has been like its name has been sullied even more so than it had ever been before, because of the attack on Gaza. And more Jews have become more, at least, questioning of Israel than before. And a lot of them say, not in our name, actually, you would be doing this, because we have nothing to do with the state of Israel doing those kinds of criminal acts.
Well, that's right. And some of the most heartfelt expressions of concern about what the Israeli government is doing come from Jews themselves. I mean, it's. I think there is the recognition that this type of behavior by the Israeli government is really, really so over the top that it just makes one think so much of what the Jewish history was about, of oppression, and yet now they are doing the same things to, and for the last 60 years have been doing the same through the Palestinian populations.
Right.
But you know, here in Hawaii, we're going to have an excellent opportunity at the end of the month.
Yeah, I have it on my laptop. We can show it on the screen in a bit,
okay.
but go ahead.
Yes,
Yeah.
here in Hawaii will be a very important conference that will talk about issues of justice in the Middle East. And it's a program that's sponsored by an organization called Friends of Sabeel, which is a Christian organization
Yeah.
that tries to bring Jews, Arabs, Muslims, and Christians together all over the world. And here in Hawaii, we'll be having a regional conference that will have some extraordinary speakers that are world-class speakers that, for example, Jeff Halper, an Israeli citizen who is the head of the Israeli program against the demolition of houses. Because so many Palestinian homes are still being taken by the Israeli government and destroyed, demolished, giving the people inside the homes 10 minutes to get out of the homes and virtually taking nothing with them. Homes that they have had, for generations. And these homes are being destroyed. So Jeff Halper and a large group of Israelis and international people are there every single day to try to prevent these destruction.
Yeah.
And some of the tragedies, not only for the Palestinians whose homes are demolished, but some very other bad things happen, to include the deaths of some of the witnesses to what's going on. There was a young American woman by the name of Rachel Corrie who in March of 2003 was in Rafah, Gaza, trying to protect the home of one of the doctors there. And an Israeli soldier driving a U.S.-made Caterpillar D9, huge bulldozer, ended up running over her and killing her. Anyway, the parents of Rachel Corrie, Cindy and Craig Corrie, will be coming here to Hawaii to speak at this conference. And they are extraordinary human beings who went to Gaza with us in March. And actually, that was the commemoration of the 6th anniversary of the death of their daughter while we were there, which was really poignant. And to see the outpouring of goodwill from the people of Gaza who, when they heard that the Corries were back in Gaza, I mean, it was unbelievable to see so many people with them every single day expressing their thanks for what their daughter had tried to do.
Yeah. Anna Balzer also, who wrote a book on that.
Yes.
Her experience.
Witness in
yeah,
Palestine.
Witness in Palestine.
She is a Jewish woman herself, 26 years old, who 3 or 4 years ago decided she would spend 6 months in the occupied territories, the West Bank. And she documented in a remarkable book the daily lives of Palestinians and what they have to go through. Having to spend hours at checkpoints to go from their home to their schools or to their workplace or to their farms. And Anna is really, her book is extraordinary, and when she is there speaking about what has happened, it's a very moving experience.
Yeah. So the conference title is "What Does Justice Require of Us?" And it's February 26th, 27th of this year at St. Andrew's Cathedral. And it should be a very interesting, different kind of take on the propaganda that we have been subjected to over so many years in the West about the Palestinians as terrorists and the Israelis are poor guys who want to live in peace, and the Palestinians haven't allowed them to do so. But we have seen in terms of the destruction of Gaza how things are actually the other way around. But these, with the Jewish individuals and Israelis who are participating in this conference, it's going to give a different take on the situation. So it would be good to attend that.
And there's a website that's set up. I think it's FOSNA.org.
And you can register online also, FOSNA.org. And Sabeel is the organization that was established by Canon Naim Atiq, who is a Palestinian Episcopalian canon, bishop, and he has established that organization Sabil that has chapters in North America and parts of Europe as well. And Sabil in Arabic, it means two things, spring of water, but also the path. The path to, for him, the path for peace and all that, and how it is that you know, Jews and Palestinians are two sides of the same coin. One cannot really solve their problem without taking into account the problems of the others. So until we understand this, peace is would be far-fetched for us. And it's interesting that Obama has the same kind of line that the Bush administration had, or even the Clinton administration had, etc. Nothing has changed. In fact, when was it? A few days ago, he was talking and he was saying that, you know, Israel is our main ally and blah 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 in that particular area. And so, if you are, if you're on the side of Israel, how can you be neutral in trying to come to a particular solution and be like, you know, a disinterested observer or a facilitator for peace, etc. So that is, I think, very disturbing in terms of the Obama administration's kind of outlook on the Palestinian-Israeli conflict.
Well, one of the, I mean, it has been the stated policy of the United States ever since the creation of the State of Israel, that the protection of that state is the policy of the United States. And Obama reiterated that 2 days ago in Tampa, Florida, when a young woman at a university setting asked, how come the United States does not hold accountable Israel? And his first comment was not about accountability, it was, will you protect the State of Israel? Well, you're not doing much to protect it when you are just blindly letting your good friend get away with everything, to be the biggest bully, to be the biggest attacker. That doesn't, if you're a friend, if you want to protect someone, you don't protect them in that way. You hold them accountable so that other people will not have the perception, because it won't be the reality, that you are protecting criminal acts, which is what the United States continues to do.
Right, because each bully will have their own comeuppance, you know, at some point. So if you're their friend, you gotta do something else, take a different outlook at this, and have a different way of dealing with the situation, so that you can protect the innocents and the victims, etc. Also, again, Dissent, Voices of Conscience, very important. Thank you very much for writing this book with Susan Dixon. So aloha also to Susan.
Thank you
for that. And so we're gonna wrap it up because we're flat out of time. But thank you for coming, and thank you for watching, and see you next month. Aloha.
Aloha.
Take care.